All right, so this is the latest installment of the Wisconsin Ag Climate Outlook, and it should be coming out officially today. So if you want an in-depth dive, take a look at the website or your email when it gets through your inbox. So the key points for this week, it was really cool, if not cold, last weekend, especially overnight. We had some record lows being set, as I'll get to, and it has been getting drier, as we've all noticed, and some pockets of abnormally dry soils are showing up in places. And next week through mid-September is shaping up to be warmer than normal. And by warmer, I mean like 80s in the highs in the 80s in the south, at least. So that's the indication, strong indication I'll get to next. But before I get there, a reminder of just how cool it was over the weekend. I mean, it really was a taste of fall in early September. These are places that set new record lows. You see that it was common throughout the state. And you do see some low 30s around, so kind of in the frost range in places here and there. But for the most part, upper 30s to low 40s, you see the warming lake influence this time of year as well. But a reminder that fall is coming and the first frost will be here before too long. And as part of that, we had a cool week. All of Wisconsin was cooler than normal. Everything here in green and blue is below average. And this covers last Tuesday through Monday. And pretty much the farther south you went in Wisconsin, the bigger the cool anomalies, all the way up to about 6 to 8 degrees below normal for the whole week, which is pretty impressive, especially as we buck the trend toward a warmer climate. And although the past week was cool, the past month was very typical. If you go back to the early to middle August, starting on the 11th, the 30-day temperature anomalies very nearly zero in terms of anomalies. The light green and yellow being plus or minus 1 degree in most places. Few pockets a little bit more unusual, but basically it was a very typical month overall, although we did have that embedded heat wave in here during late July. But because it was short-lived, it didn't really show up in the long-term average here over the past month. Now, if we look back even farther to growing degree days since the beginning of April, in terms of the total growing degree days, we see the pretty typical north-south orientation with more growing degree days in the south as expected. But when we look at the departures from normal on the right, we see that it's kind of tilted northwest to southeast. As you go more toward the northwest, you see these purples and dark blues. That indicates plus or minus 50 growing degree day units away from normal. So pretty typical either side of normal. And then as you move more to the southeast, you see more substantial increases indicating a warmer spring summer to date, but not an exceptional warm summer around Wisconsin. As I said, it was a cool week the past 7 days, but the precipitation was definitely on the dry side. Less than an inch in most places in the state. There were some places where you might have picked up an inch, but mostly it was here in the half an inch or less range. The blues and even the white, some places missed out on rain completely. And so I think it's gotten pretty noticeable, despite how wet it was earlier in the summer. Yeah, things are really, the ground is getting harder. You can feel it. One of the reasons we don't see a big impact on that yet, at least in terms of the soil moisture, is because we had a decent amount of rainfall over the past 30 days. This is showing the total amounts over the past 30 days, and I'm highlighting here that most of Wisconsin was in the 1 to 6 inch rainfall range. More central and northwest you go, the bigger the amount. Some of these are pretty substantial, 5 to 6 inches in places. But as you drift down to the south and the far east toward Door County, you see a lot of greens indicating less than 2 inches. So it did depend where in the state you were, but overall the wetness of the past 30 days helped to make up for the dryness of the past week. And then when we look at these in terms of anomalies, this is for the past 30 days. This is the percent of normal precipitation since the 11th of August. Boy, we see a lot of reds here showing up. That indicates less than 50% of normal. That was true especially in the southeast, but pretty much throughout the south. Less so, of course, in the northwest. But it was a pretty dry past month in southern Wisconsin. But when we look back at the past 90 days since the middle of June, we see that that's not the case. We see a lot of these blues and purples indicating 120% or 130% or more of normal. In fact, I just looked at the numbers at the end of August. This was the 6th wettest summer, meteorological summer on record in Wisconsin. So very substantial wetness overall, but remember, we got most of that during the first half of the summer. And then when we look out for the year to date, we see even more so that it's been wet, especially in the southeast here, less amounts in the northwest. But so far for the year to date, Wisconsin is in 3rd place. It has that wet spring and early summer has really had an impact. So that's one of the reasons we don't see a major effect in the soil moisture, although we do see some pockets of dryness emerging. This is one of the soil moisture modeling products from NASA. And we see that although most of the state is gray, indicating that it's in the 30th to 70th percentile, so close to the median, there are areas scattered around here in the west central part and then the far east where we see conditions drying out more substantially, less than 30 percentile range, whereas the central part of the state is in the wetter zone. But overall, not bad in terms of soil moisture, and depending on where you are. But certainly some places we've seen a real downward trend. This is showing the Arlington Research Farm, the Wisco-Net soil moisture at 4 inches depth. The green line here is the soil moisture starting in early to mid-July. And then the blue are the periodic rains, which haven't been all that plentiful since the middle of July. And here you see that green line dropping steadily. We were in the low to mid 0.4 units here at the beginning of the record, and we're at less than half that now in terms of volumetric soil moisture. So very, very noticeable at this stage of the game now. Statewide, though, we're in good shape. This is the latest NASS data for the topsoil and subsoil moisture that just came out on Monday. And it's nice to compare Wisconsin with other states because we can see that our soils are moister than most of our neighbors. We're at 75% adequate for topsoil, 79% for, I can go back, for subsoil. And that is definitely better than most of our neighbors. They're more in the 50s, some Indiana's the 30s. Ohio's having a bad drought right now in the teens. So we are definitely in good shape overall. And we're also much better off than we were this time last year. This is about when the drought peaked last year. We were only 36% adequate at that time. So we're more than double in terms of adequate soil moisture at this point compared to September last year. Big improvement. And that's one of the reasons why we still see no drought in Wisconsin. We're getting close, I think. This is the latest drought monitor that came out last Thursday. We do see some yellows indicating abnormally dry in places, but still not officially drought. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see some minor drought in the next week or two, given the dry forecast and the elevated temperatures. So keep an eye out that the latest drought monitor map will come out tomorrow morning. And in terms of crop conditions, I would say that we're in pretty good shape, although some of our neighbors are better off. This is the corn and soybeans in good to excellent condition, starting with corn at 64%, soybeans similar 62%. The numbers in the parentheses is change from last week, so you see there's very little change. But some of our neighbors to the south are doing better. You see some of these 60s and 70s in Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, in terms of both corn and soybeans. So we'd say we're in pretty good shape, but could be better depending how far south you want to venture. You definitely don't want to venture into Ohio because, as I said, they're really having some drought problems right now. And the dryness continues. It's looking like it's going to be a very dry week ahead. This is the latest 7-day forecast precipitation amount. And don't let these greens fool you because the greens are actually not that high. That means that no more than about a ½ an inch of rain anywhere, and actually more like a quarter of an inch, the second category of green. So most places in Wisconsin will either be dry or receive very little, less than a quarter inch during the next week, it appears. We're confident that it's going to be a warm week. I would say even week and a half ahead. It's looking like all the way through next week, probably next Friday, we're going to see very elevated temperatures as reflected in this 8 to 14-day temperature outlook. These are expressed as probabilities, and you don't usually see probabilities this high. Wisconsin's in two of the most extreme zones for likely precipitation or temperature being above normal. This is in the 70 to 90% range. It's about as high as it gets. But given the forecast for next week, I can believe it. So if you're in the southern part of the state, expect highs in the 80s, much as we've seen in the last day or two. Precipitation, no clear signal. You see here that there's sort of near normal in gray and then just leaning a little bit above normal for precipitation for the coming a week from now to 2 weeks from now. And then the forecast for the whole month of September that was made on the last day of August is shown here for temperature on the left, precipitation on the right. That warmth that we're seeing this middle of this month is reflected in the expected average for September being warmer than normal. I'd say we're certainly on our way to that. And then the dryness, that's a pretty strong signal of a dry month of September. We're definitely on our way to that as well. So warm and dry is most likely going to characterize September this year. And as we look ahead to the fall, this is the forecast that was made the middle of August for the fall season, September through November. The next update will come out next week. But like we've seen for most of the year, warmer than normal is either likely or leaning that direction. For much of the country, Wisconsin's no exception. Not a strong signal in Wisconsin. This is only in the 33 to 40% likelihood range, but definitely leaning in that direction. Whereas there's no signal at all in whether we'll see a wetter or drier fall ahead at this point. But again, see what the update is. It's usually come out the middle of each month. Okay, the take-home points for today. As I said, a very cool past weekend, in some places even cold, and that does portend the first frost in the not too distant future, especially if you're up north. So start keeping an eye on the forecast. I think we're going to be fine for the next week to 10 days, but after that, it's going to be the time of year when we have to keep an eye out. And then very dry lately with some significantly dry soils in certain regions, especially as you go to the south. Soil moisture overall is near normal in most regions, but some dry pockets have emerged, especially in the east. And then growing degree days approaching 2,700 or 2,100 units, depending on which part of the state you're in. That's above normal in the south and near normal in the north. And then the outlook, definitely a very dry week ahead, definitely a very warm week to week and a half ahead. And then the forecast for the fall is leaning warm, but no indication either way in terms of rainfall. I will stop sharing and be happy to take any questions that you have, either directly or in the chat.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Steve. That's always great information. When do we get the winter forecast? When do they start putting that one out? I guess
The
that's what
winter,
everybody's.
yeah, everyone wonders about the winter, especially after last year. The winter forecast from NOAA, I believe, comes out in October at some point. I think that's the early one. And then the November one is more refined. And this one bears watching because we do have a La Nina developing. And it does look like it'll strengthen over the winter. And, it's a mixed bag in terms of how La Nina affects our weather. I think the really strong El Nino last year definitely contributed to our warmth. La Nina, it's more of a mixed bag, I would say, in terms of how it affects our winter weather. But definitely keep an eye out in middle or to late October, and again, middle to late November for the winter forecast.
Okay, sounds good. Well, hopefully we can have you back in October and we'll see what that forecast says. So appreciate it again, Steve, as always. And as a reminder, you can sign up for the Wisconsin Ag Climate Outlook email. And so that you can get those that current information directly to your email inbox each week as that comes out of the climatology office. So again, Steve, thanks again. And that link is in the chat for those of you that need it. Appreciate it.